the systems that God had created. It was all in harmony. Adam and Eve were in there. And it was God's plan for them to remain in that state. And if they had, then they would still be alive today. And the earth would still be like that. It wouldn't be like this. But of course, straight in Genesis there, straight after all this is described, things swerve off course. No, sorry, I've got a bit ahead of myself. Adam and Eve, I'll just say the sentence, Adam and Eve were law-abiding, and that's why they were happy and contented and living in paradise and in harmony. They were happy, contented, living in paradise and in harmony because they had yet to eat the fruit. And Genesis says there that God gave them, we have written, Adam and Eve met with God face to face, and he would have instructed them. But the Bible records one specific instruction, and that is to not eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's the one thing that's recorded in the Bible that God told them to do, other than to go forth and be fruitful and multiply and have dominion on the earth. He said that, and then he said, don't eat this fruit on this tree. And for an undisclosed amount of time, Adam and Eve did that. They avoided that tree. So they actually obeyed God. And that made them law-abiding. They were happy and contented, and it was all good. Then they ate the fruit. And straight away, I'm just summarising here because I don't want to spend too much time, but in Genesis chapter 3, I don't know how much time passed, but it seems like the hour that they ate the fruit, they became afraid. They became contentious. They were afraid because God came to speak to them, and they ran and hid instead of meeting with him, which they'd done for who knows how many years, if it was years. They ran and hid. They became contentious. Like on the same day, they became contentious. Adam blamed God. Eve blamed the snake. They became naked. And from that minute on, they were bound for death. Excuse me. Bound for death. And, I mean, Adam lived for 930 years before he fell asleep, because the death from this life is asleep. And all that time, all through those 930 years, minus the few before he ate the fruit, death was all around him. I recall in the book Patriarchs to Prophets, Ellen White describes the first leaf falling from the tree and how sad that made Adam and Eve. And they probably cried because a leaf had died. And so all around them, for the whole rest of their lives here on this earth, death was all around them. because of disobedience. And that was not God's will. God's will for them was to be law-abiding. And it's God's will for us now is the same, is to be law-abiding. So, when does he want us, next question, when does he want us to begin being law-abiding? Well, yes, the answer is right now, which is the same thing. Right now. It was mentioned in Sabbath school that we might not have tomorrow or next month. So it's urgent for us to begin to become law-abiding right now, today. Now, why is this? And this is where we're coming to our object lesson in health. Why does God want us to begin right now to become law-abiding? It's because it depends on another law, right? Oftentimes we've heard the law, and we think, oh, Ten Commandments, right? But it's not just the Ten Commandments. There are also other laws, right? We have the laws of nature. Everything in nature all operates according to laws. Our own bodies operate according to laws that we don't have control over, right? What I mean is we don't have control over the growth of how trees grow, for example. We can shape them and chop them down and manipulate them from outside, but we don't actually have any control over how they grow. They're following their law. So the reason why it's important and urgent for us to become law-abiding today, right now, is because it depends on one of God's laws, and that is the law of growth. And we have a wonderful object lesson of this law of growth in the laws of health. In Testimonies for the Church, Volume 6, on page 327, it says, Testimonies, Volume 6, for the Church, Volume 6, page 327. It says, the gospel of health has able advocates, but their work has been made very hard because so many ministers, presidents of conferences, and others in positions of influence have failed to give the question of health reform its proper attention. So, just a little bit of context. Ellen White is talking to... The chapter is about canvassing, which was, book selling. So she's speaking to members of the church. But the general condition back then was that they had not given the question of health reform its proper attention. I think she wrote this in 1900, So it was 40 years after the health message began, or 35 years. It goes on and says, they have not recognised it in its relation to the work of the message, and the message is the gospel. They have not recognised it in its relation to the work of the message as the right arm of the body. While very little respect has been shown to this department by many of the people and by some of the ministers, the Lord has shown his regard for it by giving it abundant prosperity. When properly conducted, the health work is an entering wedge, making a way for other truths to reach the heart. And she goes on about the health reform. But when properly conducted, the health work is an entering wedge, making a way for other truths to reach the heart. And one of the reasons why this is true is because the health reform message is an object lesson of spiritual things. Now we have have you heard of the 8 laws of health? 8 laws of health. Eight laws of health. Isn't it interesting how they're called laws? 8 laws of health. We have, should have brought the whiteboard up, but anyway. We have nutrition. We have exercise, water, sunlight, temperance, air, rest, and trusting God. That's the 8 laws of health. All right? And living according to these laws, I mean, these are just we've condensed each law down to one word. But living in accordance with these laws, well, do you know what happens when we live according to these laws? Our bodies repair themselves. And we become healthier. So obedience to these laws equals health. Disobedience to these laws, by contrast, equals disease and death. All right? So, I mean, I haven't said anything too profound yet. We sort of have caught this. But obedience to the laws of health equals 8 laws of health equals health. And disobedience equals disease and death. But it's not a sudden thing, right? And each of these things you can have too much of, right? Or not enough of. Nutrition, for example. You can have too much food, or you can have not enough food, or you can have the wrong food. You can exercise is very helpful, but if you do nothing except exercise, then you wear yourself out prematurely, right? It becomes a bad thing. You can only go for about 3 or 4 days without drinking water, but you can actually drink too much water all at once and drown. Don't want to sound macabre, but that's happened. Too much water at once, yeah, I mean, you have to drink litres and litres, but if you drink too much water at once, at the same, in the same drinking, you can drown. We think of drowning as like being in a large body of water and not being able to breathe. Well, if you drink too much water, you can drown. You can have sunlight is very good for you, right? It's good to expose your body to the sun. But if you spend the whole day under the sun, it becomes a bad thing. So, it's important. What I'm saying is that the 8 laws of health depend on another law, and that is that all of these elements take time. There's a time factor, right? So I'm going to read a chapter from the book I was reading during the week. The book is called Natural Hygiene, Man's Pristine Way of Life by Herbert Shelton. And the chapter is called The Time Factor in Recovery. It's talking about chronic disease. We have acute diseases where you get very sick for a short time, like you get the flu or a fever or something, right? That's acute. Chronic illness is where you develop, for example, multiple sclerosis or something, right? Or heart disease, or cancer. Cancer is an extreme example, but that's chronic illness. So we're talking about chronic disease and specifically the time factor in recovery. It says one of the most trying problems of the hygienist, the hygienists back in the day were in competition with the medical men. One of the most trying problems of the hygienist in dealing with the sick, and this is particularly true of chronic sufferers, is the demand for speedy results. Everybody wants to get well in a hurry. As Mary Gove so well put it, the great trouble with Americans, this book was published in America, is that they are in too great a hurry. They are in a hurry to eat and drink and to get rich. They get sick as fast as they can, and they want a shortcut to health. Chronic diseases that have been inherited or induced by wrongdoing through half a lifetime cannot be cured in a day by any process now known to the world. It is not unusual for sufferers to demand recovery in a week to 2 weeks. And why not? Have they not been led to believe that if there is anything wrong, the removal of an organ or part will make them as good as new? Have they not been taught to be content with mere palliation of symptoms, a thing that may be achieved in many instances in a few minutes? Will not an antacid relieve stomach distress in a very short time? Or will not an aspirin relieve a headache in a few minutes? The book was written in 1968. Aspirin was the rage. Quick relief, even if only temporary, is what is so generally demanded. Indeed, they are so determined to get relief that they will die to get it. It is generally true that the means of providing speedy results produce an aftermath of troubles of their own that are often worse than the troubles they are given to relieve. Certainly they never, not in a single instance, nor in a single trouble, remove any of the causes that are producing and maintaining and even intensifying the trouble. Do you remember, kids, about the tea bag in the water? The only way to stop the water from getting greener and greener, how is that? How do you stop the water from getting greener? You remove the cores, don't you? You take the tea bag out. That's what we're talking about. They constitute symptomatic treatment and doubtful palliation and produce cumulative side effects. Why do we expect to get well in a hurry of a condition that requires half a lifetime for its development? Perhaps one is 50 years of age and has had a chronic disease since the age of 35. The condition slowly becoming worse during this time, despite, or because of, the faithful employment of the commonly administered means of palliation. Before the disease became apparent at the age of 35, there was a long antecedent series of developments that led up to it. It is literally true that the disease had its initial beginnings with the first cold, colic, diarrhea, or hives of infancy. The man may have given the methods of cure a full 15 years of time in which to restore health. But if he turns to hygiene, he wants to get well overnight. Not only is he in a hurry, but he wants to achieve his recovery with as little disturbance of his accustomed routine and as little change in his habits of living as possible. He may be willing to change his diet, temporarily of course, but why should he give up smoking? He may be willing to fast, at least he may be willing to miss a few meals, but why should he rest? He has no insurmountable objection to a temporary abandonment of coffee, but why should he exercise? He actually enjoys sunbathing, but why should he not be permitted to overeat? And this is why. It says there is no instantaneous healing. Time enters as an essential element in working for the perfection of the condition of the invalid, and healing must necessarily go through a consecutive series of developments. To believe in the sudden restoration of health is to believe in miracles. And we do believe in miracles. Jesus actually did this. But, yeah. I'm not discounting miracles altogether. I'll just say that. It would be to believe in miracles. It would also be to believe that the laws of life can be violated for years and the consequences quickly wiped out, or that these laws can be violated with impunity. And that's the point. It's not really about the miracles. It's about living in violation of the laws and then just having the results removed all of a sudden. Disease, once induced, can be removed only by a return to obedience. The return to good health is no more sudden than was the evolution of the disease. All changes in nature, from bad to good, are slow, according to the law of growth and perfection of the thing considered. An organism, like a pear tree, which grows slowly, matures slowly, and lasts a long time. It heals slowly. This is so because the measure of change is ordinarily the law of growth, the process of healing being nothing more nor less than the process of growth in special exercise. Certainly, the man whose condition has required a lifetime for its evolution will require the employment of all the means of hygiene to reorganize and reconstitute his organism. So long as even one of the causes that have contributed to the evolution of his trouble is permitted to remain a part of his daily life, and this cause may be one of omission as well as commission, it will contribute to the progressive development of trouble. Right. That was a long sentence. But if one of the causes remains, one of the tea bag remains in the water, then it will just continue to produce the trouble. All causes of weakness, impurity, and suffering must be removed from the life of the individual, else recovery will be retarded and full recovery prevented. One of the worst things about chronic sufferers is that almost invariably they have been drugged so much with all sorts of poisons that their recuperative power is low, and the organic damage is so extensive that recovery, where possible, is disappointingly slow. It is essential that we recognise the fact that recovery of health is an evolution in reverse, and that it requires time to be completed. What we term chronic disease is an evolution out of wrong ways of life. Recovery of health is an evolution out of correct ways of living. Well, it comes from correct ways of living. Recovery of health is an evolution out of correct ways of living. As it takes time to evolve disease, so it requires time to erase the abnormal changes that have taken place in the tissues of the body and to evolve normal tissue to replace the abnormal tissue. We can watch the evolution of pathology in the drinker as he progresses from the so-called moderate drinker to the habitual and so-called excessive drinker, with the progressive weakening of the functions of the body and the slow evolution of liver sclerosis, delirium tremens, and insanity. It is thought that the effects of 10 to 20 years of drinking can be erased in a few days or weeks, and that full health, with its integrity of structure and vigour of function, can be restored so quickly. Is it to be thought that? I read that sentence completely wrong. Is it to be thought that the effects of 10 to 20 years of drinking can be erased in a few days or weeks, and that full health, with its integrity of structure and vigour of function, can be restored so quickly? That's how I should have read it. If this could be done, certainly the evils of alcoholism are not as great as we are accustomed to think. The evolution of pathology out of any type of habitual or chronic poisoning, whether tobacco poisoning, drug poisoning, or a general and persistent toxic state of the body arising out of lowered functioning power, which is called enervation, resulting from an enervating way of life, is not unlike the evolution of delirium tremens out of alcoholism. Likewise, the road back, when the pathology has arisen from some of these other causes, is a slow and gradual one. In all pathologies, as they continue to evolve, a stage is ultimately reached from which there is no turning back. This is the stage of irreversibility. When this stage is reached, there is no longer any hope of recovery of health. If we understand the nature of the phenomena with which we are dealing and its causes, and if we realise that time is required for the causes that are operating to impair the organism, we can both understand the urgent need to remove the causes of the suffering of the sick and the need for time in which to evolve into a state of health. I'll read that again. If we understand the nature of the phenomena with which we are dealing and its causes, and if we realise that time is required for the causes that are operating to impair the organism, we can both understand the urgent need to remove the causes of the suffering of the sick and the need for time in which to evolve into a state of health. The average chronic sufferer cannot expect to evolve into full health in less than 2 years, and many will require more time than this. A few will require less time. Knowing this, we can, with patience and determination, launch ourselves into a way of life out of which good health evolves, and stick to it until we have achieved the desired results, and then stick to it to the end that we may maintain our gains. Nearly fell off my chair when I read this chapter at lunchtime the other day. Disease, chronic disease, takes time to develop, and it develops out of wrong ways of living. That's not what we're taught in school. The general understanding is that sickness is something that comes out from outside and hits us. We catch things and we get things. But we don't. We develop them. And it even happens if we don't know that it's wrong. And that's because our bodies are operating according to the law that God has instituted for our bodies to run by, right? And I mean, you just have to read the book. We reap the results, whether intentional or not intentional. We get them, and that's why it says at the end there that if we understand the nature of what we're dealing with and its causes, we can understand the urgent need to remove the causes of suffering, right? So we can know that these laws of health were instituted by God because they match up. It's an object lesson of spirituality. Pretty exact. It's a very faithful, concrete example of spirituality. In the spiritual application of this object lesson, we are steeped in sin. Right? That's how we begin life. We're steeped in sin. We begin with a tea bag in. This is a very interesting mixture of colours now. But we begin steeped in sin. We inherit it from our parents even. We're born with it in us. And the tendency is for us to live with it and be driven by it and to live in accordance with it for years and decades, unless we come across God's salvation, you know. That's why preaching the gospel is important, and it's why missionary work is so important. We're looking for people who haven't heard of salvation. So that's how we are. We are steeped in sin, and we think it's normal. But it's producing bit by bit as more and more of it leaches out of the tea bag into our lives. It just destroys us more and more as we go along. And then we come to Jesus, right? So we're just living in sin, and then we discover the gospel. Maybe somebody brings it across our path, or introduced somehow, but we come to Jesus. I've heard it described as a come to Jesus. Have you ever heard of like a come to Jesus moment? It's when your eyes are open, and all of a sudden you can see. But when we come to Jesus, we bring this experience with us. We come to him stained with sin and steeped in sin. There's nothing else we can do. Right? There's no other way we can come to Jesus. And so that's what we do. And at that moment, we are subject to sin, we are bound for death, and we are surrounded. With and we are practicing things which all tend towards wickedness and death. Because in the health example, if we disobey the laws of health, we produce disease. And in the spiritual application, when we go along with the law of sin, we produce wickedness. And if we don't stop that, if we don't remove the cause, then we'll just become more and more wicked. And just as in the health example, eventually we would get to the stage where we would become irreversible. Back in the days of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, well, actually in the days of Jacob was living in Canaan, he and his family, and God arranged for Jacob and his family to move from Canaan to Egypt, right? And of course, Jacob's name had been changed to Israel by that stage, and so the house of Israel dwelt in Egypt for 400 years, and that was because the inhabitants of Canaan weren't wicked enough to be destroyed. All right, you can read this in Genesis. You can also read it in Patriarchs and Prophets. But that's why the house of Israel spent 400 years in Egypt. It's because the people in the land that God had promised to Abraham and his descendants, who Israel was one of, right? He had promised that land to them, but the inhabitants of that land, it says that their cup was not yet full. They were not wicked enough yet. But by the time we come down to Moses, when Moses led Israel out of Egypt, the score then was, and the plan was for them to come back into Canaan and to slaughter every man, woman and child. Because those people had gone past the point of recovery. Sobering thought. So, what is the remedy? The remedy is to stop living according to the law of sin and to start living according to the law of life. That's the remedy. In a manner of speaking, it's a change of direction. And hence we have God saying in Ezekiel to turn. Right? God has no pleasure in our death. And we begin life headed in that direction. Now, when the Bible talks about life as a concept, it means the life in the new earth. Eternal life. And when it says death as a concept, it means burning in the lake of fire. And that's where we're bound. Unless we stop living according to that law and start living according to the law of life. Right? It's a change of direction. So, does this mean then that we suddenly change colour from green to pink? Boom. Right? Anybody who's been around for 10 or so years, or 20, or 50, knows that that's not the case. We don't suddenly go from however wicked we are at the point of encountering Christ to completely how do I describe it? Perfect. I was trying not to use that word, but perfect. It's not a tung and I'm all good from the depths. That's not how it is. But it's a change of direction. And at that point, we are saved, right? But also at that point, we've only just begun. We've stopped the sinful life and we've begun living according to the laws of life, right? But at that point, we still only have our old experience. And it takes time. Just imagine if you're walking somewhere and all of a sudden you discover that you've entered a really bad place, a very dangerous area, that you must have been thinking about something and you've walked into there and all of a sudden you're in a very dangerous position, right? So what do? You change direction and you walk out of the dangerous place. But that takes time, doesn't it? We don't just walk into a dangerous situation and then boom, we're out of it, onto a good spot. We walk out, and that takes time. So at the point where we stop living according to the law of death and we start living according to the law of life, it's a new beginning. We've just begun. And if we continue in the new direction and we stick to it and we continue obeying the laws of life, then we shall surely get there. Right? But only if we keep going. The key is in, as we find in Romans chapter 2. Romans chapter 2. Verse 5 talks about the righteous judgment of God. And then verse 6 says, "Who will render to every man according to his deeds, to them who by patient continuance in well-doing seek for glory and honour and immortality, eternal life." Right? So this is God is rendering to every man according to his deeds, those who by patient continuance in well-doing, they are granted eternal life. But unto them that are contentious and do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness, in verse 8, indignation and wrath, they get tribulation and anguish upon every soul of man that doeth evil, for the Jew first and also of the Gentile. Paul was clear, just in case people thought he wasn't talking about them. But it's in patient continuance. Patiently enduring and doing the little things every day. So, has anybody tried to do this? Has anybody tried to stop sinning and start being righteous? Nobody? Only just me? How did it go? So yes. So the next question then is how? Well, God has made a way, and that way is Jesus Christ. In John chapter 14 verse 6, Jesus says, which is his words. I'll read them so I get them exactly right. John chapter 14 and verse 6. Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me." Jesus is the way. Jesus is the way to where? He is the way to obedience. He's the way to living according to the law of life. He's the way that we all end up in the new earth. He is the way that we all end up law-abiding. Jesus is the conduit through which flows the power to keep the laws of life. That's why Jesus is so important. We're in the mess because Adam and Eve disregarded the law. And the way back to universal harmony is universal law-abiding. And that's why Jesus is so important. He's pivotal Jesus is literally pivotal. All of the communication from heaven to earth is through Jesus. He's so important that we measure the days and the years by him. The whole of history is divided into before he was born, that way for you, and after he was born. BC means before Christ, and AD means Anno Domini, which means in the year of our Lord, which is Christ. They've ruined it by changing it to Common Era. But Christ is central. And it really, it's how do I say it? It's incumbent on us to learn about Christ and about how we and him can work together to produce law abiding. Because, and the reason is that he doesn't want us to die. Now, key verse, he says, God says, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked. Turn, he says, turn. For why should we die? Why should we die? We'll, if I can find my hymn book, we'll finish our service this morning with hymn number 399.